The topic of marriage is a topic that affects every one of us. Either you are married, you will get married, or it is the fact that you are a product of a marriage. Your conduct in a marriage, or the conduct of your parents in the marriage of which you are a product, has an impact on who you are today. Children will see what happens around them. They will hear what people say around them, and that is eventually who they will become. That's why someone said, be the person who you'd like your child to be. Now, when we talk of marriage generally, as a young person, in the years leading up to marriage, when someone braces the topic of marriage, it usually brings a lot of excitement. And we look forward to it, and it is perhaps one of the greatest highlights in a person's life. But there seems to be a certain chain reaction, or we could say that there are certain stages that a marriage goes through. And because people are not aware, people are not well equipped, it has an impact on how they conduct themselves. So initially, just the talk of marriage, thinking of marriage brings excitement. And eventually when a person is fixed to get married, he can't wait for the days. She can't wait for the actual time when the two of them will come together. And the mere mention of one's partner to be brings a smile onto one's face. And then eventually the actual day of the marriage comes, and these two young people, or whatever phase they are in their lives, they come together and they start off their life together. Because it is novel, because it's new, there's excitement. They cannot get enough of each other's company. The time that they have at their disposal does not seem to be enough for them. When the thought of the spouse comes up, there is that anticipation and excitement to be with one another. And this continues for between 6 months to 2.5 years. That if every moment of marriage, every day had to depict the first day of marriage, and every night had to reflect the first night of marriage, then marriage would really be a euphoric experience. But what happens at some stage, the boy has to return to his routine. He comes home late, he comes home tired, he comes home hungry. That is with regards to his conduct. On the other hand, initially, the lady, the wife, she may put a lot of effort into her preparation of her meals and the decoration of the home. So she spends her day exploring different recipes, very meticulously spicing her food and focusing on the presentation. But then the time comes when she realizes that he doesn't even pay attention to it. And he's so self-absorbed in his own activities that she begins to question herself as to, is it worth the time and the effort? And as time goes on and he becomes more occupied with other things, the only time that he seems to be laughing and joking is when he's talking to a friend on the phone. She then starts to drift, and he also drifts in his own way. And at some point, both or one party may ask himself or herself, that is this really what marriage is about? And then there's a phase that comes about where they question as to, did I make the right decision? Am I married to the right person? And in business activity also, sometimes when a person buys something very expensive, whether it is purchasing a new vehicle or relocating to a new locality or purchasing a property as an investment, there comes a time where you ask yourself that, was this a good move? And in the corporate world, they have the term buyer's remorse, that a person has that degree of remorse that, did I make the right decision? So in marriage also, the wife perhaps first, or the husband, may question themselves as to, did I make the right decision? Did I get married to the right person? is this really what marriage is all about? Well, I have to live my life in this way. And they start to drift apart from one another. And that is where many marriages fail. And if there isn't intervention, even if there's no upskilling, if we do not have the required skills that we need to continuously invest in our marriage, then that would have the most catastrophic end, and both parties would separate their way. And that cycle continues, that after the separation, we find that it's more likely that there'd be another separation and another separation. And that is why it's so important for us to focus on the institute of marriage and to look at it in the light of the life of the Master Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Because the closer we live our lives to the Sunnah, the more successful we will be in this world and the Akhirah. And we need to have absolute conviction that the solution to every problem is undoubtedly in the Sunnah of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and in the conduct of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and that is what we term as the Seerah of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. What I'd like to focus on today is 3 points with regards to how we need to continuously work on our marriages and drawing from the Sunnah as to how Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had shown us the perfect example in this regard. And the first point is with regards to communication. Now, it goes without saying that you need to communicate. Human beings are by nature beings that communicate, and that is what separates us from the rest of the creation of Allah. That what makes us different is our ability to communicate. We communicate from a young age. A baby uses the method of crying to communicate, whether it is to indicate that the baby is hungry or tired, the baby needs changing, or the baby is feeling uncomfortable. Whatever it is, there's one form of communication. But that shows us that communication is essential from birth. However, what tends to happen is that in the initial phase of marriage, the husband and wife talk a lot. They share ideas, they talk light-hearted things. But as time goes on, the communication tends to dry up. And when communication dies in a relationship, then really that relationship has died a natural death. So you need to keep communication alive. And it may not always be that you find the time. You need to make the time on a daily basis to communicate. So there will be time where you're sitting with the family and having a meal. There's time when you're discussing issues relevant to the house, the utility bills, running the daily errands, purchasing the groceries for the home, seeing to things around the house, fulfilling daily routine. But that is not communication. Communication is where, in seclusion, you focus on one another. The cell phone has become a constant distraction that we can't even focus on what a person is saying without having to look at our phone or to look at the screen in front of us. We are constantly distracted. To focus entirely on your partner who is in front of you and to listen and to latch on every word. And it is not just all business, and then you not only focus on giving instructions or issuing commands, but there's light-hearted talk. Like the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and Al-Mu'mineen Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala speaks about Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam sitting with her and narrating to her a story of a lady who had come together with her friends. There were 9 of them. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam narrated what these ladies were talking about. They were discussing their husbands. They were talking about the good qualities in their husbands and the bad qualities. And each of the husbands had some positive, some negative. And the last one that was mentioned had more positives than negatives, or was entirely good to his wife. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam narrated this entire hadith, which is a lengthy one, which is the hadith which is commonly referred to as the hadith of Dhara and radiyallahu ta'ala. And after narrating this, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said to Al-Mu'mineen Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala that I'm to you like the last one. And she smiled and acknowledged that. This was light-hearted communication, setting aside time to just talk about things, to narrate stories. Which one of us sitting here can confidently say that I know what is the favorite color of my wife, or I know what is her favorite dress, or I know when she's happy or when she's sad? Yes, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in fact challenged Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha by saying that inni la a'rifu I certainly know when you are happy with me and when you are displeased with me. And she found it strange and she questioned Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, saying that, Min ayna ta'rifu dhalik? Oh Nabi Allah, how do you know that? That how would you know whether I'm pleased with you or I'm displeased with you? And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that when you are happy with me or when you are displeased with me, then you say, La wa Rabbi Muhammad. That in your speech you take an oath and you say, I take an oath on the Rabb of Ibrahim. And when you are pleased with me, then you say, La wa Rabbi Muhammad. That I take an oath on the Rabb of Muhammad. And when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam presented his proof for what he was saying, she smiled and she said, O Nabi Allah, La ahjuru illa ismak. Even at that moment, it's the only thing that I abandon is your name. Meaning that your love is still deeply entrenched in my heart. Your love is still deeply entrenched in my heart. Well, this was the extent to which Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was aware of his spouse. He was aware of Ummul Mu'min Aisha radiallahu ta'ala. He was aware of what was her condition. Sometimes we have situations where a lady went into depression and 6 months later the husband knows nothing about it. Like, one man was talking to his friends and he says, things are going so well that the last time my wife spoke was 6 months ago. So generally we take it for granted. If she's not talking, we think that everything is well, when that may not necessarily be the case. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was really in touch with his honorable wives, that he could say with confidence that I know what is your condition, that I know when you are happy and when you are sad. And every lady has that innate desire to be complimented, that she be adored, that she be valued. And we need to take our time. It all comes very natural in the initial phases of marriage, that you will dote over your spouse and you will laud her with praise and compliment her beauty. But years later, after she perhaps has given birth to several children, and because of the toll of that, her figure may have changed, the vicissitudes of life has its impact, and years later you take each other for granted. When last have you paid your wife a compliment? When last have you admired her beauty? It was the habit of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that he would compliment his honorable wives. On one occasion he said to Ummul Mu'mineen Aisha radiallahu ta'ala, Ma akthara bayada aynaik. That how unique is the whiteness of your eyes. What was he doing? He was complimenting a physical feature of hers. And this is natural, that every lady wants to feel that she's the prettiest lady in the world, and she wants her husband to acknowledge that and to feel that he's a lucky man to have her. Nobody wants to be told about how they've changed and how they've lost their figure. Now it comes natural in the initial phase, but you need to, and you will find the beauty, and you need to appreciate that within your spouse. That we take things for granted. We don't verbalize our appreciation. That as a husband, you come home on the average day and you find that there's a cooked meal in the house, and you think that you wouldn't even consider it necessary to say shukran, jazakillah khair, thank you very much for preparing this meal. It's just the average meal, because in your mind you're thinking that I've provided a home, I buy groceries for the home, I pay the electricity, I pay the water, I bought for her a car, I fill up petrol. There's so much that I do for her and the family, that the least that she can do for me is prepare a meal for me. That is what you think. And that's why you won't verbalize and you won't say, Jazakumullah khair. Thank you very much for this small gesture. On the other hand, we turn the tables on the wives. On the average day, when the husband sits down with the children and does the homework, or he puts the child to sleep, she wouldn't even think of it necessary to thank him, because she would think in her mind that every day or the entire day I'm sitting with these children, they're driving me absolutely nuts, they're driving me up the wall, I've got to change napkins, I've got to bath them, clean them. If he does it now and then what's the harm with that? He should at least carry his responsibility now and then. So she doesn't say Jazakallah that you put the child to bed, or that you sat this evening and did the homework with the kids. So both parties take each other for granted, and in the process what we are doing is we are losing the essence of life. And one of the most natural requirements and natural feelings is that as human beings we want to be appreciated. And when we feel appreciated, we are more willing to do. Even in the work environment, you'll find, and there's a study that has been conducted by the University of Georgia in the United States, that employee or that individual who feels appreciated is more willing to do. If your employees feel that they are appreciated, you'll find that they are more willing to do. And why not in our marriages? If a lady feels that I'm being appreciated in this marriage, she'll be willing to invest more of her time, more of her effort, more of her energies. And by the same token, the husband, if he feels appreciated, and what we find that most people these days feel that I'm not being valued for who I am, or for what I do, or for my contribution. So what we need to do is verbalize, express it. Yes, it may be implied, and the person, your husband, your wife, you may have told them that, but don't think that I said it and she knows it. Renew it and say it again, and say it sincerely. Watch what you say what you mean, and mean what you say, and it will have a new impact. It will bring that spark alive in the marriage. So the first point is with regards to communication. The second point is with regards to the physical touch, display of affection. And as I outlined, that this comes so naturally in the first phase of marriage that you cannot get enough of one another, and that spark turns from a spark to a raging fire. But as time goes on and you begin to become absorbed in your daily life, you tend to drift apart from one another. And then there may be times when there's the urge to fulfill one's need or desires, and you limit it to that. But there's no investment, there's no taking out time, there's no appreciating, there's no making one another feel emotionally fulfilled. How much do we really invest in our relationships, and how close are we to our spouses? Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would call his honorable wife Ummul Mu'mineen Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, Ya Humayra, oh the one with the pink cheeks. He had a pet name for her. And she later on narrated this to us as the Ummah, giving us an indication that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would refer to her in this particular manner, showing affection, showing love. Who of us have or refer to our spouses, our wives in an affectionate manner? There are many things that we take for granted and we don't even think of it, that these small acts go a long way in building a solid relationship and keeping that bond alive and keeping the relationship very intense. That we are told that in everything that we do, there is charity, hatta luqma, to the extent that that morsel that you pick up and you lift it to your wife or your spouse's mouth, there's reward for you in that also. So beautiful our deen is, that in lifting a morsel to your wife's mouth, there is a reward in that. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would in his own action display this to us. Ummul Mu'mineen Aisha radiallahu anha says that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would take a glass of water, he himself would pick it up and drink, and then he would look for the place. In fact, he would give it to Aisha radiallahu anha initially. He would give her to drink, and he would look where she put her lips, and he would then pick up that very glass and place his lips on the very place where she had put her lips, and he would drink from that glass. That was his display of affection. And she herself would narrate, and she would say that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam later on, at different times when he was resting, he would rest on my lap. He would place his head on my lap, wa ana ha'idun, and I was menstruating at that time, yet he would recline and relax against me and take support from me. And once when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was in ittikaf, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would put his head towards the outside of the masjid, and Ummul Mu'mineen Aisha radiallahu anha, she would comb the hair and wash the hair of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. These may seem as small actions, but it goes a long way in building that relationship, especially when these actions are displayed between partners, when they've been married for a number of years, yet you continue to interact and show your affection in this way. That would really go a long way in building one's relationship. And when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would come to the home, then al-Mu'mineen Aisha radiallahu anha was asked as to what would he do? Kana fi mihnati ahli. He would assist with the household chores. He would be actively engaged in the home. He wouldn't be sitting on the couch, reclining and giving instructions. Get me this, do that, instruct. He was an active member of the home. In fact, Umar radiallahu anhu said that, it impresses me when I see a man that when he's in his home, he's like a child. But when he's outside, then when the need be, he can also be a man. Meaning when he needs to discipline, when there's a call for jihad, then he stands up and he takes his responsibility. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would interact with his family, would assist them in all the chores. In fact, there was a time when I had a discussion on the radio station, and I put the question out to our listenership, that as ladies, as a wife, what would you prefer? Would you prefer that your husband assist you with household chores, or would you prefer him giving you chocolates and roses now and then? And I tell you what, more than 70% of the women said they would prefer the husband assisting with the household chores. al-Mu'mineen Aisha radiallahu anha says that when she was asked what would Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam do when he come to the house, she explained and she said, Kana yabda'u bis-siwak, that he would make miswak, he would cleanse his mouth. Now she didn't explicitly state this, but an intelligent person can take a hint that what was the reason why he would cleanse his mouth. When he would enter the house, he would kiss his wife. That is part of the Sunnah of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So the second point is the affectionate touch. And different people display love in different ways. Some people, it may be important for them to have words of affirmation. For others, the affectionate touch is very important. There are those who focus on, giving and receiving gifts. Everyone has their own emotional need, and it's for you to discover one another as partners in a marriage, and then to support and to complement one another. The third point that I'd like to make, in which we can enhance our marriages, is that we need to have understanding and tolerance. That two people coming together, you have a different mind, different disposition, so it may be challenging at times, but to find the common ground and not to respond to every provocation. There was an instance where a police officer had reported on a crime scene, and on the crime scene, after observing what happened, he went to the car and he radioed into his sergeant and he said that, Sergeant, I have a unique case today. So the sergeant asked, what is the story? So he says that a lady shot her husband because he stepped on the floor that she's just mopped. So the sergeant asked, have you arrested the lady? So the police officer says, no, the floor is still wet. So there will be provocations in the marriage, and you may irk each other, you may test each other, but it's for you to remain composed. We have this problem every time where the wife will say, give me my talaq, and the husband responds by doing it. Now when a lady says, give me my 3 talaqs, the husband thinks that she's asking for it, let me give it to her. But what she's essentially saying is that, show me that you love me so much that you wouldn't consider giving the 3 talaqs. That is what essentially she's saying to her husband, but we take it on the literal and we respond by issuing those 3 bullets which cannot be retracted. So we need to learn that tolerance in our marriage, and we need to understand that different people have different emotional needs. That one of the emotional needs is to spend quality time together. There was an instance where al-Mu'mineen Safiya radiallahu ta'ala anha was out on an expedition with Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and it was her turn to be with Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Nevertheless, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had gone ahead and he reached the point of camp and he had settled down for the evening. She came later on because her camel was slow, and when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came out to welcome her, she was actually crying. فَاسْتَقْبَلَهَا وَهِيَ تَبْكِي, and she was crying, and she said, you purposefully put me on a slow camel, so I missed out. What she was saying, I missed out on spending time with you. And at that moment, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam didn't turn to her and say that how childish of you to cry that you missed out on a half an hour, an hour of spending time with me. And that is what you think, you're crying to spend time with me. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam wiped the tears off her face with his own hands, فَجَعَلَ يُسَكِّتُهَا, and he consoled her until she then returned to her normal condition. So there is the desire, a lady wants to spend time with her husband, and the husband needs to take out that time and realize that that is part of the emotional needs that she has. When two people come together, it is different, there is challenges, but we need to continuously invest. If one person thinks they're going to put 50% and the other one thinks that he or she will put 50%, then that is not enough. Every party needs to invest 100%. And if you're willing to do that, yes, there's no such thing as a honeymoon for life, that you can never mimic or perpetuate those feelings that a person experienced at the initial stages. But if you continuously invest in your marriage, whether it is through your communication, through that affectionate touch, or that understanding and tolerance, then there's nothing in this world, that can give a person the joy, the fulfillment, the happiness and contentment that marriage can give a person. An engineer was asked, what is the difference between a wedding and welding? And he said, technically there's no difference. When there is welding, you have the spark first and bonding forever. And in a wedding, you first have the bonding and a spark forever. Islamically, there's nothing before the actual bond. So we need to invest in our marriages. And if we are willing to invest, what is the result? We have good marriages that will produce children that when they have that stable environment, they're able to grow up excelling in all facets of their life. They granted good Islamic education. They then know what is their rights to Allah. They're able to excel academically and also contribute to the community. And research and statistics show that when you have bad marriages, from that, what does it produce? Children who become delinquent, they drop out of school, they are more prone to alcohol, to drug abuse, to teenage pregnancy, and it destroys the entire life. And that cycle then continues. It is for that reason that we need to continuously invest in our marriages. It may not be easy all the time, but as someone said, that marriage is not all sunshine, but two individuals can come together and share an umbrella and survive the storm. May Allah grant one and all good, happy marriages and strengthen and solidify our marriages. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala khayri khalqi Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.